Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. I'm just hoeing the weeds from this cut flower bed, and I sowed it with seeds of hardy annuals about 4 weeks ago, and they've germinated quite well, but I want to thin them. The germination and my sowing, it has to be said, has been slightly erratic. It's too thick in some places and a bit thin in others. So this is 3 rows of nigella, lovely blue flowers. But to get the best of each plant, you want cut flowers to be really strong plants. And in an ideal world, you'd have individual seedlings spaced about 3 inches apart. Well, you can see they've got nothing like that. So what I'm going to do is start to thin them. Not too dramatically, but just reach in and just pull out from the side of the row. Don't try and thin them down to exact spacing. I just want to reduce the width of the rows, if possible, to a single seedling. And I can have another pass at this either later in winter or even early next spring. Now these are cornflowers, Blue Boy. Now here, I'm going to pull up a clump, divide it and replant it. So here we go. That can go back in there to fill the gap. And then I've got 2 more to come in here. Now a bit of judicious thinning and transplanting will set these up. They're not going to grow much more this winter, but next spring they'll be here ready to burst away when the days get longer and warmer and give us cut flowers about a month or so ahead of those that we sow in spring. Now, coming up on today's programme. Joe visits the garden designer Tom Hoblyn at his home in Suffolk and discovers his passion for fruit trees.
I've got this sort of curiosity orchard down there, which is almost sort of weirdo fruits that I've collected around that I just grow for fun.
We're catching up with Sue as she contemplates the highs and lows of her gardening year.
Having these new borders has been a massive experiment, and some of it has failed and some of it has succeeded. But what it's done is it's expanded my knowledge and reinvigorated my love of plants.
We explore a richly planted Devonshire garden, bursting with colour, that makes the very most of its scenic views.
The borrowed landscape's really important because it acts as a picture frame to all my planting, and also in some ways the landscape comes inwards as well, so it all becomes one.
And I shall be planting Amaryllis for Christmas, as well as juicing some apples. Come on, good boy. Although the garden is distinctly thinning out at this time of year, and by the end of October all the summer flowers have more or less finished, that comes with a real advantage because it creates spaces. And in those spaces you can plant. And it's a very good time of year, probably the best time of year, to plant any woody plant, trees or shrubs of any description. And that's because the soil is still warm, so it'll have a good month of the roots getting established and growing without any demands from the foliage or flowers. I've got a corner here which is perfect for this particular Weigela. This is Weigela candida. Not only is it white, whereas most of them are various shades of pink, but also it grows tall and upright. But whatever type of Weigela you choose, this is how you plant them. First of all, just dig a hole that's a bit wider than the container. You want to encourage the roots to spread out sideways into the soil. Almost all the feeding roots are growing horizontally, not very far below the surface. So open it out. Nice loose root run. Now, what they like is light shade. They do need reasonable drainage, but other than that, They're really robust and reliable plants. Now, when you take it out the pot, if you can see more root than soil, that's pot bound. So just go around and break the roots. And by breaking them, they're going to grow new roots from the point where they break, and those new roots will grow out away from the containerized soil. So that's good enough for that. And then set it so that the surface of the soil in the pot is slightly above the ground level. When you plant any woody plant, it wants to be on a slight mound, so you're creating almost a little cone around the roots. If you plant it in a saucer, water will collect and it will sit in water. I haven't added any goodness to the planting hole because all you're doing is encouraging the roots to stay in that hole. And then angle your heel, so you're pressing your heel down from the outside of the planting hole in towards the center, like that. Now, all Weigelas flower in spring. May and June are their flowering months, and it flowers on the wood that is grown the previous summer. So if you prune it in autumn or in early spring, you will have no flowers. The time to prune Weigela, like all spring flowering shrubs, is immediately after flowering. Be generous with the water. Right, I will let that soak in, give it a good mulch, and that'll be fine. Now, last autumn, Joe went to Suffolk to visit the private garden of a fellow garden designer.
I've known award-winning garden designer Tom Hoblyn for many years, and it's always great to catch up with him at Chelsea and see his latest designs. So when he invited me to see his own garden here in Bury St Edmunds, I didn't have to think twice. And it turns out he's not just a great designer, but also a very passionate fruit and veg grower too, and has a wonderful kitchen garden. Tom. Hello.
Joe, good
How
to
you
see
doing? Yeah. Wow, this is amazing. But it's a very traditional wall garden here, isn't it? I mean, I see you as a contemporary designer. I wouldn't put you two together.
Well, you know, I mean, we've got 2.5 acres here and there's plenty of room to try everything. But when we discovered that this was a wall garden, because it was so overgrown when we came here, we could only really do one thing, and that's turn it back into a productive, very high maintenance garden. This is the west-facing walls. We've got all the cordon apples and cordon pears here. I've got this fantastic arbor, which is actually a wedding present that we used to grow the espalier pears on, and this year I'm growing ornamentals.
Great wedding present.
I know. This is the legume bed. Here's the allium bed, and then my courgettes, which I grow up on canes here. I've got the sort of curiosity orchard down there, which is all my sort of weirdo fruits that I've collected around that I just grow for fun.
After an inspiring tour of the garden, it's very clear that Tom has a passion for growing fruit trees, especially apples. So you've got all these wonderful cordons on this wall. It's a great way of growing lots of apple varieties in a small space. So what pruning do you actually have to do?
Well, cordons, surprisingly little. You train them in, and then you're pruning in June. It's called a June prune is all you do, and you're basically cutting back these whippy shoots. I mulch them, and they get pruned, and I leave them.
Pruning once a year?
Once a year, yeah.
Keeps it really simple too.
Yeah, and you don't even need a wall. You can just make a frame, like a pergola. You could even just use fence posts and some wires.
Yep.
You buy them as a sort of a 1-year-old tree and you just train them in. I mean, it couldn't be easier. And look, these are absolute perfection.
Gorgeous.
This is Lord Lambourne that just look beautiful and taste wonderful.
Honestly, Tom, I didn't have a clue that you were so into your fruit and veg, and, well, especially apples. Where's it all come from?
I guess my grandfather was probably the first person. He was a Tom Hoblyn as well, and he was integral in developing the rootstock that governs the ultimate size of trees and was actually given an OBE for it.
Oh.
Yeah, I know, yeah. So it's sort of always been in our family.
Here we've got, fully grown trees.
Yeah.
Of all different sizes as well. And getting the rootstock is absolutely key, isn't it? It's very important.
So there are 3 main rootstocks to think about. You've got a sort of dwarfing one, you've got a semi-dwarfing one, and then you've got like a vigorous standard one. If you've got a small garden, you want a more dwarfing one, and a bigger garden, you want a more vigorous one. And that's it.
What about this one?
This one, James Greaves, which is the semi-dwarfing rootstock, probably my favourite rootstock. And, they're 4 metres tall now. That's it. They'll just bush out a little bit more, and they'll never get any bigger. And I won't need to take secateurs to them again.
You don't prune, you just leave them?
I just leave them, yeah. And the great thing is apples are very, very forgiving as well. So, if they're happy, they're going to reward you.
Tom's collection of fruit trees has expanded over the years as a result of a bud grafting technique called chip budding. It involves cutting a bud from another tree and implanting it into a new rootstock. It's one of the methods fruit growers use to propagate new plants and is easy to do yourself once you know how.
First of all, what you do is you cut all the leaves off. And we're going to get one of these buds, which has all the sort of genetic material in to make another Worcester pearmain, and we're going to splice it onto the side of this rootstock here. So you cut down here and you want to hit it so it's just, you can feel it touch the wood. I mean, you don't have to be too precise. And you really want sort of 1/3 of bark up here and 2/3 down here. But again, don't worry too much about it.
Okay.
So you're cutting down like that, and then you're going to sort of just slice off
The bud.
the bud here.
Beautiful.
And it comes off there, perfect.
Yeah.
You want to go approximately 6 inches above where the soil's going to be. You can see the roots growing out here.
Yeah.
So approximately 6 inches up here. So you want to cut down, yeah. And the reason why you've cut a little notch down there now is so this will sit in.
Magic.
And look, it actually fits
Look, that
perfectly.
is beautiful, Tom.
The next thing to do is get a bit of grafting tape. Now you can use anything. You can even use strips of cotton. So if you hold it there, and you can't be too firm in wrapping it around, so you almost want to stretch it as it comes round.
Okay.
Because the idea is you're sealing in all the moisture. And this is, at this point, I normally cut, because now I know this is on, I don't need that little peg anymore. So I just cut it off.
Oh, you're learning as well.
She's an inquisitive one, that one. And then just do a little half hitch at the top.
Nice.
Pull that down, trim it off, and leave it there. That has worked really well.
Beautiful.
It will fuse together, but to be on the safe side, I tend to leave the tape on till the spring. In about March, you come in and you cut just above the bud here. So you're cutting through your chip bud. So all that's left is that bud. So all the energy that's coming up this rootstock now goes into this bud, and that will grow and that will become your
New tree. It is magic, isn't it? It is. It's horticultural magic. It's brilliant. It's been so interesting coming and visiting Tom in his own garden. But he's kept it really simple. He hasn't complicated anything. And he keeps those processes simple too. And whether you've got a large garden or a small garden, it's just so inspiring, the whole space. It's beautiful. And it just makes me want to go home and plant some apple trees, get the right rootstock, but get them in the ground.
I think Tom's point about the rootstocks is so important. When you're planting apples or any fruit tree, find out about the rootstock because it determines how big the plant grows. In the orchard, they're mainly full standards, and I regret it. And I regret it not because they're not nice trees, they're beautiful, but because most of the apples are out of reach. It means that they fall to the ground. And this year, where we had a lot of wind and rain throughout September, hundreds of apples have been bashed to the ground before we can pick them. And once they hit the ground, you can't store them. Now, you can eat them, and you can juice them, and I'll be doing that later. But the one thing I would say to you is just find out about rootstocks, work out what you want, and then make sure you've got the right rootstock as well as the right variety. Now, this hedge at the end may look like a sort of decorative feature with a window out into the open world, and hopefully it does look good. But actually, it was planted for a reason, and that reason was to hide something. What the hedge hides is this, which is our Leafmould bay. And this is where we bring all our fallen leaves when we gather them up towards the end of this month and in November. We mow them first, and that makes the leaves decompose much quicker, but it's still a slow process. So it sits here fully for a year before it's ready to be used. A leaf mould bay differs from a compost heap in that the action that breaks down the leaves is fungal rather than the bacterial. So you don't need to turn it, just make sure it's damp, leave it alone, and the fungus will get to work. And a year later, we'll have reduced it to this lovely material, which has such good use in the garden. And if you haven't got room for a leaf mould bay, you can make leaf mould in old compost bags, make holes in the bottom, just put them in, make sure the leaves are nice and wet, turn them over, stick them behind a shed, forget about them for a year. And we use it as part of our potting compost. Good boy. Come on then, let's go. Come on, good boy. This barrow load is going to be perfect for mulching these beds on the mound. If I was to use this for potting compost, I'd sieve it. But for mulch, there's no need to do that. You can put it on as it is. And this is perfect for woodland plants. Mulch is doing all the things at this time of year that it does in spring. It's suppressing weeds, it's keeping in moisture. But with leaf mould, really importantly, it's improving the soil structure. It doesn't have the same nutrition as compost, but actually that doesn't matter. That's not so desperately important. Now, the mulch works into the soil through earthworms. Worms will do everything for you. Just lay it on the surface, be generous. Better to do a small area thickly. Now, earlier this summer, we went to a garden near Tiverton in Devon, belonging to Delia May West. And it was a garden that, not so long ago, was an empty field.
I love this time of year because the dahlias are all in flower. I love the way the light changes through the day and the hedgerows become full of blackberries and rose hips. And I just love the stillness. There's a stillness to the air and the day. My garden's on a hillside in Devon. We moved here 5 years ago and there wasn't a garden here at all. There was literally a gate that opened out onto a vast field. So we sectioned some of it off and started building the garden. Being on a hill, it lends itself to the views, which are absolutely stunning. The borrowed landscape's really important because it acts as a picture frame to all my planting. Everywhere you stand, the background becomes that picture frame. And also, in some ways, the landscape comes inwards as well, so it all becomes one. Dahlias are one of my favourite flowers, and I just love them because of their structures, their colours. I love the bees on the dahlias because at night time they tuck themselves up inside. They actually become like sleeping pillows for them. Oh my gosh, I've lost count of how many dahlias I've got. I must have, I don't know, possibly 100. So the way I keep my dahlias going is to keep deadheading them. The more you deadhead, the more they will flower. And the way to tell a spent one is because it actually becomes a cone. And if you sort of squeeze it like this, a bit of moisture comes through and you can see there's no petals left inside to come. And then a new one is just a round bud, sort of like these here. As dahlias go, this is just stunning. It's a bit crazy in its appearance. I know it's not to everybody's taste, but I just absolutely love it. Bees love it as much as I do. So being here in all weathers, it's absolutely lovely, but when the sun comes out, it attracts all the bees and the butterflies, and you can just sit and listen and just be absorbed in the garden. So when we first moved here, it was important for me to have a kitchen garden. So we sectioned a part of it off at the top and started building beds, greenhouses from recycled materials. I love growing vegetables because I like to grow my veg to fill the freezers with for food, you know, through the winter months. I like to make my jams and my chutneys and my sauces. There's always something to pick up there, there's always something to do. And what I love is to be able to pick it and put it in my trug basket and trundle off back into the kitchen and sort it all out. In here at the moment, I've got my carrots to harvest, but my carrots are always misshapen because we've got really stony ground, but it doesn't matter because I can peel and chop these and I put them in the freezer, and then the real misshapen ones I add to casseroles and stews, so nothing gets wasted. The tops go to the chickens as well for them to eat. The summer months are my favourite time of the year because it's full of colour. Flowering here along with my dahlias, I've got verbena, echinaceas, lobelia, cocosmia, and I like the fleabane dotted around. Although it's white, it actually sings with the rest of the colours. So we started off building the kitchen garden, and then I wanted a little orchard, and I looked it up and it says if you have 5 fruit trees, that constitutes an orchard. So September's one of my favourite times of the year because you're harvesting everything. But what I love as well is stocking the freezer and my pantry shelves. And it gives you those tastes and flavours of summer when the darker nights are drawing in. The one thing I love to do with the apples at this time of year is to dehydrate them. So I chop both ends off and then I peel them. And then I will slice them, and then I've already made a solution of lemon juice and water and I add them to that, and what it does is it stops them from going brown. And I'll let them stay in there for 10 to 12 minutes, and then I'll shake them off, put them in my dehydrator, and I'll leave it on for about 12 hours. And then you can put them in a jar and they're dehydrated and you can just eat them as a snack all year round. Really sweet. I just feel so incredibly lucky. Gardening to me is everything. It just feeds my soul. To grow things from seed, to watch them flourish, to watch them grow, to see the pollinators come in. To share it with nature is just amazing. It's wonderful.
I think it's really interesting that Delia is drying apples because I grow some varieties of apples specifically for drying. They're called beefing apples. It's Herefordshire beefing, Norfolk beefing, bred by the Victorians because they had a very low moisture content. Now, it's time to cut back these Mediterranean herbs. The herb garden here is chosen because actually the soil is really poor. It's almost all stone, but these Mediterranean herbs, like oregano, like thyme, like sage, like rosemary, are very happy in those conditions. And we let the marjoram, and by the way, marjoram and oregano are really one and the same thing, grow rampant because the bees love it. They absolutely adore the flowers. But now they've stopped flowering, they've set seed, it's time to cut them back. And don't just cut the flowers off like that. What you need to do is go right back to the base, absolutely to the ground, and cut them back there. So if I get in here, you can see I'm completely clearing. And what that is doing essentially is letting light into the base of the plant. And there, just flush with the ground, is a whole mass of new foliage. This won't grow back over winter. As the light levels drop, as it gets colder, it'll hunker down. But it's very tough, and as soon as the weather warms up, next April it will start to grow and then flower next June and July, be covered with bees again. I absolutely love it. Now, still to come on today's programme. The writer and houseplant expert Jane Perrone shares her tips on how to care for plants to create a green oasis inside your home.
When you've done your research, you understand how that plant grows in the wild. And that enables you to really take good care of it in your home. And that way, you should have plants that will last you for years and years and years.
Sue is planning for next year and weighing up some of this year's successes and failures.
Over the years, I've developed a way of landscaping and plant selection that allows me to garden myself. And I got so excited about my new borders that all of that went out the window.
But first, we're going to visit one of your gardens. And this is in Lewes, in East Sussex.
Well, hi everyone. My name is Gavin, and I thought I'd take this opportunity to show you around my collection of miniature trees and show you what I've been growing. We can see that we have a camellia that's looking good, nice trunk on that tree. Begin to leaf out, and it's looking really good. We have this dawn redwood that's putting on a load of growth, and it's absolutely going berserk. That's going to need a prune real soon. We have a Chinese elm just in here, coming out in leaf, looking really nice. We have a pine tree that's been styled in a really sort of curly-whirly design. You have an English elm just here, a Cotoneaster, another English elm, coastal redwoods, a Norway spruce, and another English elm. There are a couple of ways that you style a tree. One is you can wire them, and the other way is to use the clip and grow technique. Allow it to grow and then cut it back. Allow it to grow and then cut it back. And that's how you ultimately create a little bonsai tree. I've been growing bonsai for around about 3 or 4 years. And over that time, I've experimented with a wide variety of different species of trees. And what I like to do is collect the seeds from the trees, and hopefully they grow the following spring. So if we just take one at random, let's just take this one. This here is a silver birch. And this is grown on from a seed that I collected from a birch tree. Over time, we can train it, prune it, and style it, maybe even wire it, to fit a style that suits us. You can make a bonsai tree out of nearly anything, and this is my sycamore bonsai. So this was a tree that's actually grown up the garden. So one year I decided to dig it out of the ground and I planted the remaining roots into this washing up bowl. Over the last couple of years, I've trained to the top. I've added a little bit of wire just to wire some of the branches out, and the tree has absolutely flourished and grown well. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Gavin. And I love the way you're growing trees from seed. People get frightened of growing trees from seed, somehow feeling it's too big a leap. But actually, it works. You can see it does. And also, if you've got a sycamore or an ash or a holly growing in or near your garden, you're bound to have loads of seedlings popping up. So just dig up one of those when they're tiny, pot them up, and as Gavin has showed us, you're off. Now, it's a good time to be planting Amaryllis to flower at Christmas or in the new year. Amaryllis, of course, have these enormous bulbs, a very long stem, and an enormous trumpet of flower. It's an operatic diva that sings out in the middle of winter with this extraordinary flamboyance. Now, when you buy Amaryllis, there are two ways of doing it. The first is to buy a kit, and I realise that that's how most people get them and grow them, and kits are really good. I'm a fan. Inside the kit, you get a bulb, you get a pot to grow them in, and you also get a growing medium. Now, this may not look like the normal compost you buy in a bag, but it's just compressed, dehydrated coir. Soak it for about 40 minutes, and this will expand out, become soft, and become a perfect growing medium. There's just one thing to bear in mind. You can see the size of the bulb, and it fits the pot well. But then, if you buy the bulbs separately, either from a garden centre or online, the chances are that they can be much bigger. And look at the difference in size between these two. And when you're growing bulbs of any kind, big is nearly always better. As long as it's really healthy and firm, always go for the biggest bulbs that you can find. And this is about 7 or 8 pounds, whereas a single bulb, loose, this size, is between 10 and 12 pounds, so appreciably more. However, you will get appreciably more flowering. This is a variety called red velvet, but whatever variety you grow, planting them is exactly the same. You need a pot that's not much bigger than the bulb. So I'm going to put a crock in the bottom, and then using the compost, just fill in around it so the roots are in the compost, but 2/3 of the bulb is above it. I'm just firming that in, and then we'll get a little bit more around that. And it doesn't matter terribly what compost you use, as long as it drains well. Water it well, and then it won't need much watering until the foliage starts to appear, maybe once every 3 weeks between now and Christmas. And it certainly doesn't need feeding. But what it does need, and this is really essential, is warmth. You don't need to give it any light to start with, not until you start to see a shoot. So if you've got an airing cupboard, you could pop it in there for a week or two, but keep checking it, because once the shoots appear, it will need light. And then when you start to see a decent stem with a bud forming on the top of it, you can then put it in whatever position you want it to display. One little tip I would say is that once the flowers are out, move it to a slightly cooler position. If it's slightly cooler, they will last appreciably longer. The flowering period for the whole plant can be as much as 6 weeks. Now, more and more of us are growing houseplants, mainly foliage, and they're transforming our homes. And that's a wonderful thing. And I can't profess to be an expert on houseplants, but we went to Bedford to visit the home of somebody who is.
I really can't remember a time when I wasn't growing houseplants. I can't imagine not having them in my life. They are so important to me, and I just get daily joy from looking at them and also sharing them with other people. I'm Jane Perrone, and I am a garden writer and journalist. My nickname at school was Botany, and that's probably because I was sort of spouting Latin names of plants from quite a young age. I'm really fascinated by the history of houseplants, the journey they've taken to get into our homes, onto our windowsills. When you buy plants, when you've done your research, you understand how that plant grows in the wild, what kind of conditions it grows in, and that enables you to really take good care of it in your home, to find the right spot where it will thrive. And that way, you should have plants that will last you for years and years and years. This is the Chinese money plant, Pilea peperomioides. This has been a plant that's become really popular on social media in the last few years, and I think that's because this round leaf photographs beautifully and people love the way the plant looks. And it's a really good house plant because it's very prolific, it produces lots of babies, and it's very easy to reproduce. You can just pluck out one of these baby plants and grow it on. This plant comes from Yunnan province in China, and it tends to grow in quite rocky environments. And that's worth bearing in mind when you're thinking about growing it as a house plant. It likes moisture, but it likes free draining potting mix. So if you grow it in cactus and succulent compost, that's great. Or you can just add some drainage material to regular houseplant compost, and that way you can give it the water it needs without it suffering from root rot. It can take an awful lot of sunlight. It probably doesn't want to be in absolute direct sun in the height of summer, but it will adapt quite well to quite a lot of light. It's also quite amenable to a little bit of shade. So it makes a good houseplant for that reason, because it's adaptable to lots of different conditions and positions in your home. This is Crassula ovata variegata, the variegated jade tree or money plant, and it's a stalwart houseplant that has been popular for many years because it's just so tough. It can cope with life with a little bit more shade than most of the other succulents will tolerate, and it actually grows to the size of a small tree if it's given the space and time. It protects itself by being fragile. And what I mean by that is when it's fed upon by herbivores, some of the leaves drop to the ground and these root really easily to make a new plant. And we can take advantage of that. So if a leaf falls off, just like this one's done, it's easy enough to make a new plant. We can just put this on a shelf for a couple of days and wait till the cut end has calloused up, then lay the cutting on some gritty compost, stick it inside a clear plastic bag. Hopefully within a few weeks you'll have a new baby plant to enjoy. String of pearls, or Curio rolianus, is a beautiful houseplant that gives you this waterfall effect, but it's really not the easiest. I come across lots of people who have killed their plant quite quickly. I myself had a beautiful specimen that I killed. So they really are a challenging plant even for experienced succulent growers. So the leaves are shaped like little balls, and each leaf has a tiny stripe across it, which is like a tiny little stained glass window, and it's called a leaf window. We don't fully understand how these leaf windows work, but botanists think that these help to control temperature and the absorption of light for photosynthesis. When you grow this plant at home, it's important to remember that in the wild, it doesn't grow as a string, it grows as a mat. The root system is very fine and fibrous, so you need to give it a shallow pot and make sure that the compost is really free draining. You can't really give this plant too much drainage. You can use these little balls as a guide to when the plant needs water. So in the winter, only water when those little globes are starting to deflate, a bit like a deflated football. In the growing season, you can feed occasionally with cactus and succulent feed, and you can water reasonably generously, provided that you're giving that really good drainage. That's what this plant loves. One of the reasons I love learning about the background and history and backstory of houseplants is it's really fascinating. You find out how these plants were used in the places where they come from, where they're used as medicine, where they're used as food, and it just provides a rounded picture of your plant that hopefully makes you appreciate them a little bit more. They're not just green wallpaper, they become a kind of a character that in a story that's a really fascinating tale. I think this might be the most iconic houseplant of all. Monstera deliciosa, the Swiss cheese plant to give it its common name, and it's an absolute houseplant classic. This is a plant that seeks out something to climb. One of the problems that people find with this plant is that it gets to the ceiling and they don't know what to do. Can they cut it back? Yes, you definitely can hack back this plant. It's used to losing some stems in nature, and the feeder roots allow the plant to stay connected with the earth even if the main stem is severed. So these are tough houseplants. The main thing to know when you're taking a cutting of Monstera deliciosa is locating the nodes, and this is quite simple. So the node is just the point where the leaf stalk joins the main stem. So we are trying to cut within what's called the internodal space, and that just means the bit between the nodes. And generally, I would advise cutting just above a node. So there we go, we've got the cutting, and we can just now trim it to just below this node and disregard this bit of stem. We've got this lovely healthy root, that's going to root on, and before long this will be a lovely big Monstera deliciosa plant on its own. I get so much joy out of my plants. I just love being surrounded by them. It really brings me a lot of pleasure to be taking care of them and also passing their descendants on to other people. It's really rewarding. So yeah, I think my plants are here to stay.
As more and more of us are growing houseplants, it's good to get some expert advice on how to get the best out of them. Although sometimes you get the right answer almost by accident. I stumbled on the best way to grow Streptocarpus after getting it wrong lots of times. And then I went to South Africa and I saw them growing in their natural environment. And I was next to this rocky face and had Streptocarpus growing out of the rock that was running with water and in deep shade. And I realized that what they liked was shade, moist air, but very good drainage. And we tried various places, and eventually I stuffed them under here, thinking, well, I don't know where to put you, but maybe that'll be okay, and they love it. And they've been here ever since. And it's that combination, they're on gravel, which is nice and cool and holds a bit of moisture. It's shady, but it's got some light. And I don't water them very often. I bring a hose in here and I just spray them over at least once a week, and if it's hot, 2 or 3 times a week. And that's what they like. Now, I've been distracted. I didn't mean to talk about Streptocarpus. I was on my way to plant some cabbages. The cabbages I'm going to plant are spring cabbages. In fact, I think of them more as spring greens. Spring cabbage, like Hispy cabbage or these, which are Durham early, they tend to be pointy. They have this pointy top. Whereas winter cabbages, like Savoys, which have been growing since spring and are ready to harvest now, tend to be round. But if you plant spring cabbages a little bit closer together and pick the greens before it hearts up, you have delicious spring greens somewhere from the end of March through to the middle of May if you plant them now. But to plant them now, you've got to have seedlings. And the truth is, I forgot to sow my spring cabbage, which I should have done by August. So I bought these seedlings, and if you can get some plants like these in plugs, good root system, you can plant them out to the end of this month and they will be ready for harvest next spring. I've spread a layer of compost over the top, and that's important with any brassica. They're quite hungry plants, which is one of the reasons why traditionally you sow brassicas immediately after legumes, because legumes fix nitrogen into the soil and the brassicas can take that up and use it. So these are quite close together, and that's deliberate. If I wanted them to have good, strong hearts, I probably would double the spacing. Now, what I will have to do when I've got these in is create protection against pigeons. It can be very simple. I'll just put some sticks in and drape netting over it, because pigeons in winter descend upon brassicas, particularly young ones like this, and will strip them bare. Other than that, water them in and then pretty much forget about them. And they're really important in that hungry gap between the end of winter and the beginning of the summer harvest in April and May, when the vegetable garden actually is at its barest. Now, last month we went down to Swansea to visit Sue in her garden at home, where she was taking stock of how her summer had fared.
It's full-on harvest time here. I've got pears ripening on the trees, reddening tomatoes in the greenhouse, I've got squashes growing over gates, and I've got beans growing over trees. But here I've grown beans slightly differently. I'm growing them on the horizontal. Because this is my hot red border, I've planted some runner beans which have lovely red flowers. And it's had two benefits. One is, if they grow on canes, I just can't reach to pick them if they're any height above here. So here they're hugely accessible. And also, this is a really ugly wall, and it has covered it magnificently. These beans I'm going to pick now, but the rest of them I'm going to leave on the stems to get bigger and to dry, so that I'll be able to have dry beans all through winter. When you last saw me, I was busy planting up this border. Now, this is the first of my hot borders, which you see straight away as you come into the garden, so it's got to look good. And I was going for a winey red colour, and I think I've achieved it. I put in some blood grass, and I put that at the back, because I thought it could look after itself, because that would be difficult for me to reach. And then, because I wanted it to look good straight away, I filled the space with cosmos and antirrhinums, and they really have done well. I'm really happy with this. I think this is a success, more than I thought it would be. But there's another area that hasn't been so successful. Over the years, I've developed a way of landscaping and plant selection that allows me to garden myself. I really am the queen of the narrow borders, and that means I can reach and tend the plants quite easily. And I got so excited about my new borders that all of that went out the window, and I created a really bigger border than I can manage, and it's not doing well. What's happening is I'm going into the border to tend to the plants, and then I'm damaging everything. So I've come up with a plan. Rather than keep trying and failing, I'm reorganising straight away, a little bit of more landscaping. So I've put a terracotta path down to mark out the area of the border that I'm actually going to completely remove, take all the plants and use them elsewhere, and put down some slate. And then I'm going to make a nice little seating area so that then I can sit there and look out across my beautiful garden. One of the things I've been most impressed with this year is my perennial wallflower bose mauve. And I want to have more of them, so I've taken heel cuttings earlier in the season, and they're ready to plant out. And I took some quite recently, and they're ready to pot on. I put the cuttings around the edge of the pot because it's warmer. Now, I'm going to take them out and give it a pot a bit of a squeeze and then see what's occurring. You can see there's lots of roots where the side of the pot was, so they do like it. Now I'm going to break them up slowly because there's 4 in here. And look, there's a lot of root there and there's not so much root on this side. So I've got a little bit of soil in the bottom and I'm going to pop my cutting in. And they like a sort of free draining soil. So it's a mixture of homegrown compost and a bit of manure and a bit of garden grit. And firm it on round. Right, that's 4 new plants ready, and officially they should grow in the ground by September. But I planted some out last year on the 29th of October and they did fine. So if they grow on a bit more, I will put them in the ground. If not, I'll put them in the greenhouse, overwinter them and then plant them in the spring. I've got some planting to do, so it's time to put my gloves on. I really love having lettuce all throughout the year, and I'm going to plant some winter lettuce that's really winter friendly. That means it'll cope with slightly harsher conditions. And this is the right place to plant them because I've got some sun and I'm also sheltered. I wouldn't normally buy plugs, but I've been completely defeated by the slugs this year. I've got winter density, which can really go through the winter and will survive the frosts. And the soil that I'm putting them in is very free draining because there's nothing lettuce hate more than having their roots in soggy soil. So the next ones are Marvel of 4 seasons, and the clue is in the name. They're designed to be grown in 4 seasons. They're winter hardy and they've got a lovely red colour on them, so it looks great in a salad bowl as a contrast to the green. And they should survive the frosts, but if it gets really, really cold, they can always do with a little bit of protection to ensure they'll make it through the winter. I'm going to sow a few seeds to grow inside the greenhouse, or you can grow them under a cloche or something. And these are not quite as hardy. This is an Italian lettuce, Latagino, and it will heart up, or you can use it as cut and come again. And it's very tasty, and I'm just making a very light drill. With small seeds like lettuce seeds, you want to be careful that the soil is fine, because if they get trapped under a crusty soil, they won't be able to sort of break through and come up. So I'm just tipping a few into the drill, and I'll thin them out when they're successful. I'm going to put these in the greenhouse away from slugs, and if you don't have one, you could just cover it with a tall, clear plastic box in the winter to keep them safe. Having these new borders and introducing myself to all these new plants has been a massive experiment, and some of it has failed and some of it has succeeded. But what it's done is it's expanded my knowledge and reinvigorated my love of plants. So trying something new is something I'm going to be doing a lot of in the future.
I do agree with Sue's point about experimenting, trying things out. It's really important to get out your comfort zone, to grow plants you've never grown before, and perhaps which you didn't believe could be grown, either in your garden or your part of the country. Right, I'm scratting, and I like to scrat. Scratting, and this is a scratter, means chopping up apples into small pieces ready for pressing to make juice. And this bit of kit works a treat. That's done there. I can take that off. And now I have a bucket of finely chopped apples. And it goes into this muslin bag. Pop it in. And then the bag gets folded over it. We pop this over the top. That goes in there like that. Now, a bit noisy. Right, that is now poised to squeeze. If you don't have your own apple press, there are loads of community presses who will press apples for you. There are lots around if you look up locally, or there will be someone who will press them commercially. They'll charge you, but it'll be worth it because they will pasteurize it and put it into bottles or containers, and that means you can store it. Now, this is quite a job, but it's one that I really like, and I've got a lot of apples to press, so while I'm doing that, here are your jobs for the weekend. If you plant hyacinth bulbs now, they can flower in the depths of winter, but they must be specially treated bulbs. Normal hyacinths won't flower till spring. Take these bulbs and pack them tightly into a bowl containing a free-draining compost. Cover them over so their snouts are just appearing out of the surface of the compost, and then put them somewhere cool and dark for about a month. When they have shoots that are a couple of inches long, bring them out into light, and they will flower a matter of weeks later. If you have hard paths, they can get very slippery at this time of year. And the easiest way to deal with this is to sprinkle some sharp sand and brush that in firmly with a stiff brush. This acts as an abrasive, wearing away the moss and algae and making the path a lot safer to walk on. Forget-me-not seedlings will be spreading everywhere around the parent plants. But to get an even display next spring, break up the clumps, store the plants that you keep ready to replant more evenly at a suitable moment. What that has is an intensity of apple. And it won't keep for very long, a couple of days in the fridge, but you can freeze it. And then in the deep months of winter, you can go back, defrost it, and you'll get that intensity all over again. So if you've got apples, celebrate them, use them. And if you haven't got an apple, plant one. Well, that's it for this week. Frances will be with you next Friday at 8 o'clock, and she is going back to Powderham Castle in Devon. And I'll be back here at Longmeadow in a couple of weeks' time. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.